a theist on the line. So let's go to Ron. Wanted to continue. Pronouns are he, him in Canada. Wanted to continue the conversation about objective morality. So I think we have a theme here today, Dan.
Oh boy.
How's it going? And yeah, welcome to the show. You're with Dan and Jmike. What is on your mind specifically?
Oh, thank you for taking my call. I appreciate it. And nice to meet you guys and chat with you.
You as well.
So I have a question. So you guys are very logical and very kind of linear and logical in your thinking. And I like that because I can kind of, rationalize things with you. So I would want to know from your perspective, I would want to learn, what is your perspective? How do you distinguish what is objectively right or wrong? What is an objective ought versus what is subjectively right or wrong or a subjective ought? How do you distinguish that for both of yourselves?
That's interesting because I don't know that I can. Can you? I think we're on the same page in terms of
me. I don't
know.
Actually really love meta ethics, so it's a topic that I could probably talk about forever. Yeah. So when the thesis about objectivity, when it is in regard to morality, that means a mind independent fact, right? Some independent fact that does not matter about what you or I think. It's independent of minds. Okay. When you talk about a subjective thesis, you're talking about something that's mind dependent. So for me, it's an incoherent notion to talk about morality, to say that there's some independent reason that isn't tethered to my desires or other people's desires. And the reason why I think it's strange is you can use certain situations. If I was to run into a building, save some kid from a burning building, and someone said, "Hey, you risked your life. Why did you do that?" And my answer was, I recognize some mind independent duty, like that. Nobody would say that. That's not what you do. You recognize desires and values that are tethered to you. And this goes back to what I said earlier about being a conscious creature. And so my values will tie to that. So for the moral realist, what they have to do when they talk about objectivity, they have to provide a basis and justify the objective part by some mind independent thing. And the last thing I'll say real fast is that theists think they do this with God. They think God is that mind independent thing, but they don't realize that the thing that's the source of the morality is mind dependent source. So it does not actually evade the issue. They're just a subjectivist as well. So that would be my perspective.
I see. That makes complete sense to me, that how you describe that. But wouldn't it also mean that even if the
hold on 1 second there. I think we got two people talking at once. Real fast, Dan, what were you saying? We got Dan. Okay, let's go. I'm sorry, Ron. Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't hear Dan. You weren't coming through. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
I was getting two voices, but it's passed. So go ahead.
I just refreshed myself.
Okay. So even if the theists falsely believe in attributing the Bible, let's say, to a divinity or a god, even though you can proving that it's related, that it's divinely inspired or God breathed or God's truth, isn't it objective to say that this is what the book says?
No.
The book's fact that the book has it itself. Can we not say objectively that either the book has this value or the book doesn't have this value? Leaving aside God. Why not?
Yeah, it's just two reasons. One, this goes back into a problem I harp with people a lot about the interpretive methods they use, right? So when God gives some utterance or says something in the book, when you read that, you have a duty of interpreting it, and then everybody interprets things differently, but the question is, which one of the interpretations aligns with God's actual means, right? What he actually meant by the passage. That issue we can set aside because there's a worse issue. When you talk about, even if like God exists and I just grant God exists, right? Just give you all the toys there. Even if we just grant God exists, you have a question now of like, is it good in virtue of the fact that he commands something in the book? or he commanded something in the book because it's good, right? This is a typical euthyphro. It's just to say, like, is the goodness in his commands, or is the goodness outside of the commands, and he's kind of reflecting that? Well, if you say it's reflecting that, then it's an independent source. We don't need God. We can find the objective independent source without him. If you say it's within his commands, it's arbitrary, right? Because anybody can issue a command. Now, the thing that most people do here is they go, it's not in the commands. It's the fact that God is good, and his word or the book is objectively displays that God's nature is good. But you're left with a worse issue here, okay? Because now the question is, what is it about the nature of God that makes it good? Because if I just say it's good because of the properties that God has, right? God has properties X, therefore it's good. Then why couldn't an evil God look to its nature and say that is the good, right? Because the only thing you're leaving on the table is that some God with a nature, any nature, determines the good. That's not good. That's arbitrary, because that means whatever contingent feature the God is, or it could be a different God, it could be an evil God, it could be a good God. All it has to do to deem what the good is look to its nature. That's non-independent. That's mind dependent. That is depending upon the properties, the consciousness, the mind, whatever it might be. It's depending upon those properties, and it's arbitrary, because if I substitute that God with an evil God or with different properties, we would say that's good for the same reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And Romans, like, you look at like passages like Romans 2:15 and, you know, in the Bible, where it says that it's instilled on your heart, it's written on your heart. So that's even worse, because if now I look at the text, I can never know what the good God is, because it's only the good God is only the God that writes it on my heart. And any God could do that, but that doesn't tell us what the good is.
Right. There's the fact that what the message is in the Bible, the fact that it lines up and is congruent with my conscience or your conscience, what most of us likely deem is good. Does that have any relevance?
You're asking me if mind dependent facts determine that? No, the idea is to have a mind independent one, not shared dependent.
And this is appealing to social consensus, which doesn't make it objective.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's an even better point.
Well, let's take if we take the logical extreme of that. Let's say the Nazis in Nazi Germany at the time. They knew that they were committing wrong, but they knew internally that they were committing wrong, but they knew that at the same time they would not be judged or punished for it, because that was the normal of their society. What would you tell them? What would your answer be to them who were doing it? That, what they even thought may have been righteous?
Yeah, the last call, the exact conversation I had would be the exact same thing I would say for this. So I would just say to re-listen to the call and apply the same thing to any scenario that you add, rather than just saying it over again. But Dan, what about you?
So you,
I guess I'm kind of I'm not sure if I fully understand the question. If you could maybe repeat it.
Well, because determining if the Nazis were right or wrong is entirely far more a mind-dependent activity. But to say that the Nazis were wrong, maybe in part mind-dependent, but mostly mind-independent in the form of the objectivity of the Bible. If you could say it with grounding within the Bible that they were wrong, then it's far less mind-dependent than saying just merely on your own accord, yeah, I didn't like what they were doing because my mind tells me that that's bad.
Right. So you can make appeals to specific principles. You can point and say they did not follow this specific principle, and that is an action that you can do, and then other people can say, yes, I agree, they didn't follow this principle because I understand this principle as well. Whether or not that principle is necessary for what you should consider the criteria as a good or bad action for, that's where you're inevitably going to have disagreements, right? So I talked about this principle of equal consideration earlier. I can go to you and say, these Nazis, they didn't like this. They didn't follow this principle. And this is why I think that they're bad. If somebody doesn't care about this principle or uses some other North Star or guiding point for their morality, then we're going to have disagreements on whether something was good or bad, right? So that's really all I could say to that, I suppose.
Yeah, if I could add just real fast, Ron, the issue that I have is when you say, well, it aligns with the book. That is a middleman, because my question is, okay, well, what is the book? Because this is just a book. I could use any book to justify it, which would be going back to arbitrariness. So now I have to add the question to avoid arbitrariness, which is the whole issue I have from the offset is, what about the utterances in the book or the words in the book that align with the good, the independent good? And if you say that the book is just kind of reflecting the independent good, we don't need the book. We just have to find the independent good. We don't need the book, because we can't know from the book alone that it aligns with the good. We need independent justification to know that it aligns with the good. So the book's useless because we need the independent justification anyway. So we now we go to, is God the source of it? Well, if God's the source of it, we're right back to mind dependency. We're right back to a subjectivist meta-ethical thesis. We're right back to this idea that the book is only good in virtue of the properties within God, which are only good based on some arbitrary notion of what God happens to be, because it could happen to be a different God, and we would use the same reasons to justify that book, which is different.
But if I may, it's not just an arbitrary book, and the definition of God is not arbitrary. It's quite clear how the book defines God, the characteristics of God. So it's not arbitrary. And there's
I don't think it's at all.
Ron, I don't think you're understanding my objection. Yeah. My objection is not. My objection is that whatever God you are using is arbitrary. Like, you're using God X in this book, okay, and that defines the good, okay. The problem is when we ask the questions and we lead back and we go, what about the God makes it good? And we ask that question, it goes to, well, God has these properties within him. He is the good. Okay. But the problem with that, if God X is the good and we have God Y that has some other nature, let's say it's actually the bad. Okay. Let's say your God has the good nature. Let's just say that to make this easier. Your God X has the good nature. This other God Y has the bad nature. The only criterion that we're using to determine the good is God has some nature and looks to that nature, which is the same thing God Y, who's an evil God, can use, and the same thing that your God. So now you need something independent, which just goes back to the fact that if you need something independent, God can never serve as a basis for objective morality, because you're searching for something independent of a mind. And every time you add God, you're bringing back subjectivism into the mix.
If I may, I think you're adding a definition of God. You're redefining the definition of God. Because if you follow the definition of God, the way it's written in the Bible, then you know...
Your definition of God that you have interpreted from your reading of the Bible.
Wait a second. No.
I mean, he makes a point, though, Ron. It's called a panacea. You're defining something that serves as the cure for any problem you have. That's not there's no epistemic humility in that at all. It's just like, I'm going to define things that avoid certain problems later down the road. That's how that comes off to a non-believer.
You mentioned an evil God.
Yeah.
And so why should I not follow the evil God, God Y? But that already redefines the nature of God. Because according to the Bible, which is the original version of this God, God can only be one. It's an ethical monotheism. If there is more than one God, then it becomes invalid, as you are saying. If there is an evil God, then you have another moral code. According to the definition of this God, it can only be one God.
Do you know what question?
That's what
Ron, do you know what question begging is? Because that's what you're doing, right? You're defining a term. You're defining a term in a nature that can only be good. It can only be good. Okay. Now let me do the same thing with God Y. I do that with the same with God Y, and it's arbitrary still. Everything that you're using as the criterion to establish why it is good, it can't be any other thing. I can use the same tactic for God Y.
I'm not
and what does it do? It doesn't elaborate to anybody what the good is. It just says a God looks to its nature and just deems what the good is. Anybody can do that. Anybody can look to their nature and go, I think this is good. I think that's bad.
But God is telling you what is good in the Bible.
But now you're admitting it's a subjectivist thesis, because now you're admitting to me that it's mind dependent. It's dependent upon the way God is it not?
No, it's written in the book how God is independent.
So there's an independent reason.
Yes.
Okay, so then we don't need God. Cool. If there's an independent reason for objective morality and you just admitted it, we don't need God. Because, well, why would I need God if we can go search for the independent reason? That's what moral realists who are naturalists are doing.
Independent from the mind. No, I'm not saying morality is independent from God. I'm saying it's independent. What you were saying, it's independent from our mental notions of God. Because now these notions of God are defined clearly in that book. I mean, you may not believe that it was God is true or real, but the book is.
You're hitting the wrong, right? Ron. You're hitting the wrong points. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're one step before where I'm at. I'm talking about the God. It has nothing to do with me. I could be dead tomorrow, and my argument will still work.
Well, nobody knows the nature of God. We're all guessing at the nature of God. If it's all just a matter of pure subjectivity.
No, that's not true, Ron. You just told me the nature of God. You said the nature of God was good. So do we know the nature of God, or do we not know the nature of God?
That's not Ron's definition. That's not Ron's definition. I don't have the guts to come up with a definition of God.
Yeah, but no, Dan just made a good point, and now you're not answering the question.
Okay. Sorry, what was Dan's point?
Do we know the nature of God, or do we not know the nature of God?
We know the nature of God by how God says his nature is.
Okay, and can't God, why? That's an evil God, do the same thing?
No, because that redefines God.
Okay, so begging the question again. Well, we're back to that part. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's anything more I really want to explore with this. I think it's not ad infinitum. There's no infinite regress. God is the original. That's how God defined itself. God in the Bible defined itself. So there's no infinite regress. There cannot be a creator of God.
Ron, this has nothing. Look, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to mute. This has nothing to do with an infinite regression at all. This has to do with a very simple point that you're saying God is good, which when I'm asking to get to how we know God is good or what is the good, you just say it's defined as such. So one, I don't know how you don't know that that's not begging the question, right? We're asking why, and you're just saying it is so. Okay. Two, everything that you've listed as a criterion on to determine the good can be utilized for God, why, which we're saying upon analysis actually has an evil nature. Okay. That God can do the same thing under the same basis that you believe God X is a good God. Now, in virtue of what removes the arbitrariness from those two? That's the only question we should be answering.
Well, I don't know of any book that had the impact on the world, or that a book that aligns with my conscience that is evil. That's
your criterion, is just a book. A book says a thing. That cannot be just your criteria.
His reading of a book.
Well, it's not just a book. It's not just the book.
It is just a book.
Personal incredulity.
It is just a book. Have you demonstrated that it's not just a book? Because to me, it seems that nobody's like, this is like saying I have an idea of a unicorn in my head, and I'm going, have you demonstrated inside your head that there's a unicorn? No, you don't just start from the fact alone that you did all the work.
Well, okay, but I'll tell you why the book is important, and more than just an arbitrary book like
I want to know why. I want to know that it's true. I don't care why it's important. You're just giving me your subjective analysis on why you think it's important. I've heard Christians tell me that every day of my life.
Right. We don't ultimately know that it's true. We don't. But what we do know is that a people for the last 3,500 years have staked their life on it. So? It's clearly something it's very meaningful to this people. They were willing to die. That's far more.
You know how many Muslims?
More significant.
Ron, you know how many Muslims exist in this world? You know how many Muslims have died for their texts? Should we then, by this criteria, consider the Quran to be something worth our looking into?
Well, their existence of a people doesn't depend on it.
What?
What?
This religion is part of the ethnic history, and it's a theological.
What do you think the Quran is?
What do
What do you think? You don't think the Quran is important to the ethnic history of the Muslim peoples?
Yes, it is important. Of course, it's important.
Okay.
Okay,
So
so-
by your criteria, by what you're saying is, this is such an impactful book. So literally people have died. Entire regimes and nations have fallen because of this book. I don't know if you understand the history of the Muslim world, right? And so by this definition that you have put forward, you are saying that we have to take the Quran seriously, Ron. That is the only conclusion I can come to, right?
But let me if Islam disappeared, the Arab people wouldn't disappear. There would still be Arabs.
Okay.
This Judaism
What does that have to do with anything?
entwined because it's a religion and an ethnicity together. So it's a people.
Okay, if the Torah disappeared, there'd still be Jewish people. What is your point?
Yeah, you're
Like-
trying to pretend like this adds like epistemic considerations to it being true when like I don't like
Well,
no.
significance, of course it does.
No. Okay. So you're telling me that that it logically follows that something is true under that basis of a criterion? You think that logically follows?
Then, yes, I'm drawing a difference between Harry Potter and the Bible, which many I have heard made that.
When you draw that distinction,
All Harry
call me back up because I cannot find the distinction between one obvious fairy tale and another really fucking obvious fairy tale.
I just told you the difference. One, a whole people stake their lives on it. Their existence wouldn't be here but for this book. That doesn't exist for Harry Potter. That's not the same significance.
Even if it didn't, even if it did not, right? Like even if there wasn't some person that was really into Harry Potter, and I won't even get into potential scenarios just to make the point. But even if that was the case, there's no logical entailment from you going, people believe X or it's affected people's lives to therefore it is true. That gap does not follow in any way.
It's true. I'm not saying it makes it proof of its truth, but I'm adding it's one source of evidence or one kind of evidence that leads to the plausibility of its truth.
It's not evidence.
Of course,
A bunch of people believe in stuff.
Yeah,
That's just an appeal to popularity.
Why is the written
popularity?
history,
I don't know.
Why is the written history of a people of a book that they believe their history is based on? Why is not not a form of evidence of their theology?
It's a testament to the fact that people are gullible. It's a testament that people have really shitty standards of evidence. It's a testament to the fact that people don't think when they apply themselves. That's what it's a testament to. It's not a testament to the truth value of the religion. Are you kidding me?
I know, Ron, that you know that billions of people in the history of the world have believed in Islam. And you do not believe in Islam at all, if I understand you to be a Christian, right? I assume that you don't believe any of those texts to be truthful or even meaningful to your life in any considerable way. So you have to see that as a parallel, right? Because like if all these people can believe in the Quran and have nothing to do with you and nothing to what you consider to be true, then why can't we say the same thing about Christianity? Like, what is the difference there?
Well, we don't know that of its truth. We're still guessing and speculating at its truth. But what we do know is how entwined this faith is in their history. Why would they have made it a part of their history if they did not truly believe it was true? Is that
we have never contested the fact that they don't think it's true. All we care about is whether it is true. Otherwise, why even talk about it?
There are people that risk their own. Look, there's people that risk their own like public embarrassment by getting into what I'd say now it's gone a whole different level. But what I used to be into, which was spiritualism. People like will believe this stuff and it'll ruin like friendships in their family. People think like you think crystals heal people and they look at you differently, right? But they're dedicated to thinking it's true. But there's nothing about that where it follows that there's some epistemic value to it because Agent A thinks rocks heal people and he's willing to commit like social suicide over it, which I don't think like people should judge people for that in that way, but it happens, right? Mm-hmm. That's the reality that we face. But there's for you to point that out for like Christianity and then not have it be applicable for anything else is not just special pleading, but it's just a demonstration of your standards of evidence are like, they need to be built up. I don't know where they're at, but they need to be built up somewhere, because that's,
Yeah.
if I believed that under that basis, you could convince me of anything.
Right.
It wouldn't be, I would say it's not proof. Again, there's no proof of the truthfulness of any of these statements that I'm saying. I'm not proving for the existence of God. But all I'm saying that it's one piece of positive evidence for the truth, then let's say zero evidence from the book of Harry Potter. There's zero evidence for the truthfulness of, or the plausibility.
So if people started dying for Harry Potter, if people started depending on their cultural lineage of Harry Potter, that would elevate Harry Potter in your mind.
Yes, that would add one piece of truth of evidence that maybe there's some.
Well, doesn't that say something about your system? Doesn't that tell you that maybe this way of evaluating evidence is perhaps implausible, if not incorrect in some fashion? Because I think we can both agree that Harry Potter has nothing to say about reality, right? Like, it doesn't describe reality.
But Dan, it has something to say in virtue of a lot of people dedicating their lives to it. If that sentence doesn't sound weird to you, or not weird, but wrong, then
I'm from Waco, Texas. You know what happened in Waco, Texas in 1993? A lot of people died because they followed the teachings of David Koresh and got into gunfights with the ATF and the FBI. And there are still people that live on that compound to this day. I don't think their dedication means jack squat. I don't care. That doesn't. That they're not worthy of my consideration, because we can look at what they believe, and it has no jurisdiction over the truth or what I should say about reality. In any way.
That's one piece of evidence. I'm saying that's one piece of evidence, and I'm saying
it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. That's what we're saying. You shouldn't consider that as a piece of evidence.
Yeah, even if I granted that it was evidence, which I don't think so, but even if I grant, we got to run because we're getting short on time. But even if I granted that was some form of evidence, it's not sufficient evidence, and there's a lot of work still to be done. And I would also be consistent and apply it. Ron, I'm gonna have to mute you. I would be consistent and apply that to other, like Dan already did it. He already pointed out something. I think that if you were to listen back, you would go, yeah, I don't think Harry Potter has any basis on reality. But you think so once it's established that people will do things over it, that somehow has mind independent, like truth or something, which is weird to me because it's clearly dependent upon the way that minds just read Harry Potter and then decide to do dumb things over that. But regardless, it's I think we identified the issue, which is,
I think so too. I would also would like to add something I wanted to say earlier, is that if you're using the Bible, to come up with your definition of God, you have misstepped from the very beginning, because the Bible is a collection of texts written at least 1,000 years or more apart from each other, from various authors, dozens of authors from different time periods and different cultures, who had various ideas and interpretations of what God is, what his morality is, and what that being who they think it should be and what it should be to those people. And you can very clearly see that between just comparing anything from the Old Testament to the New Testament, really these differences in theology on how these people understood God and how we understand him today for most people. So, that's already a non-starter if you're using the Bible. It's not an authoritative text on God, and it shouldn't be. You know who should be the authority on God? God. Unless you're getting it from God himself, or if God wrote a book, then that's something. But otherwise, you are getting it from people, and people are always going to be infallible, right? So anyway, infallible. Sorry, fallible, not infallible. That would be a different conversation. But anyway.
Well, Dan, where can viewers that may not or may be familiar with you find you at?
Oh, well, you can always follow me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan, where I like to shitpost about all kinds of stuff. But I am mostly known for being on Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central, and this show right here. I do make my appearances on Talk Heathen. So come find me on those places if you want to see me.